So, hello and welcome back yet again to A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, where we seem to be back in the French Revolution, where, I mean, it's a revolution. You expect it to be bloody, and it definitely is. I'm kind of wondering what's going on back in London, but like I keep saying, that is a me thing. I don't even mind like stories that are about war and everything. I guess this feels so impersonal because it's all kind of done in prose that even though it's really action packed, I feel like I'm really at a remove from it. But it is nice to be getting some action in this book. Also, our weather is still being stupid. We had snow Friday, snow Saturday, and it's supposed to snow again tonight and all day tomorrow. And then maybe we're going to get some spring. Maybe. No guarantees on that though, because we warm up and then winter comes rushing back. Winter in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is an adventure or something. I'm not sure what you call it, but we'll go with adventure. Anyway, another semi-short chapter today, but that's okay because the next one's going to be probably pretty long, it looks like. So we're just going to go ahead and jump back in. We are getting closer and closer to the end of book 2. And book 2 is titled The Golden Thread. And then we'll be moving into book 3 sometime, I think, by the end of this week. But we are on chapter 23 of book 2 of A Tale of Two Cities, titled Fire Rises. There was a change on the village where the fountain fell, and where the mender of roads went forth daily to hammer out of the stones on the highway such morsels of bread as might serve for patches to hold his poor ignorant soul and his poor reduced body together. The prison on the crag was not so dominant as of yore. There were soldiers to guard it, but not many. There were officers to guard the soldiers, but not one of them knew what his men would do beyond this. It would probably be not what he was ordered. Far and wide lay a ruined country, yielding nothing but desolation. Every leaf, every blade of grass and blade of grain was as shriveled and poor as the people. Everything was bowed down, dejected, oppressed, and broken. Habitations, fences, domesticated animals, men, women, children, and the soil that bore them were all worn out. Monsignor, often a most worthy individual gentleman, was a national blessing, gave a chivalrous tone to things, was a polite example of luxurious and shining life, and a great deal more to equal purpose nevertheless. Monsignor as a class had, somehow or other, brought things to this. Strange that creation, designed expressly for Monsignor, should be so soon wrung dry and squeezed out. There must be something short-sighted in the eternal arrangements, surely. Thus it was, however, and the last drop of blood having been extracted from the flints, and the last screw of the rack having been turned so often that its purchase crumbled, and now it turned and turned upon with nothing to bite, Monsignor began to run away. Run away from a phenomenon so low and so unaccountable. But this was not the change on the village, and on many a village like it. For scores of years gone by, Monsignor had squeezed it and wrung it, and had seldom graced it with his presence except for the pleasures of the chase, now found in hunting people, now found in hunting the beasts, for whose preservation Monsignor made edifying spaces of barbarous and barren wilderness. No, the change consisted in the appearance of strange faces of low caste, rather than in the disappearance of the high caste, chiseled, and otherwise beautified and beautifying features of Monsignor. For in these times, as the mender of roads worked solitary in the dust, often not troubling himself to reflect that the dust was what he was, and to the dust he must return, being for the most part too much occupied in thinking about how little he had for supper, and how much more he would eat if he could, in these times, he raised his eyes from his lonely labor and viewed the prospect. He would see some rough figures approaching on foot, the like of which was once a rarity in these parts, but now was a frequent presence. As it advanced, the mender of roads would discern with no surprise that it was a shaggy-haired man of almost barbarian aspect, tall in wooden shoes that were clumsy even to the eyes of the mender of roads. Grim, rough, swart, steeped in the mud and dust of many highways, dank with the marshy moisture of many low grounds, sprinkled with the thorns and leaves and moss of many byways through the woods. Such a man came upon him like a ghost at noon in the July weather, as he sat on his heap of stones under a bank, taking shelter as he could from a shower of hail. The man looked at him, looked at the village in the hollow, at the mill and the prison on the crag. When he had identified these objects in what benighted mind that he had, he said in a dialect that was barely intelligible, "How goes it, Jacques?" "All is well, Jacques." "Touch, then." They touched hands, and the man sat on the heap of stones. "No dinner?" "Nothing but supper now," said the mender of roads with a hungry face. "It is the fashion," growled the man. "I meet no dinner anywhere." He took out a blackened pipe, filled it, lighted it with flint and steel, and pulled until it was a bright glow, and then suddenly held it from him and dropped something into it from between his finger and thumb that blazed and went out in a puff of smoke. "Touch, then." It was the turn of the mender of roads to say this time, after watching these operations, and they again joined hands. "Tonight," said the mender of roads. "Tonight," said the man, putting his pipe in his mouth. "Where?" "Here." He and the mender of roads sat on the heap of stones, looking silently at one another, with the hail driving in between them like a pygmy charge of bayonets, until the sky began to clear over the village. "Show me," said the traveler then, moving to the brow of the hill. "See," said the mender of roads, with a finger extended. "You go down here, and straight through the street, and past the fountain." "To the devil with all of that," said the other, rolling his eye over the landscape. "I go through no streets and past no fountains. Well?" "Well, about 2 leagues beyond the summit of that hill above the village." "Good. When do you cease to work?" "At sunset." "Will you wake me before departing? I have walked 2 nights without resting. Let me finish my pipe, and I shall sleep like a child. Will you wake me?" "Surely." The wayfarer smoked his pipe out, put it in his pocket, slipped off his great wooden shoes, and lay down on his back on the heap of stones, and was directly fast asleep. As the road mender plied his dusty labor, and the hail clouds rolling away revealed bright bars and streaky streaks of sky which were responded to by silver gleams on the landscape, the little man, who wore a red cap now in place of his blue one, was fascinated by the figure on the heap of stones. His eyes were so often turned towards it that he used his tools mechanically, and one would have said poorly. The bronze face, the shaggy black hair and beard, the coarse woolen red cap, the rough medley dress of homespun stuff and hairy beast skins, the powerful frame attenuated by sparse living, and the sullen and desperate compression of the lips in sleep. They inspired the mender of roads with awe. The traveler had traveled far, and his feet were footsore and his ankles chafed and bleeding. His great shoes, stuffed with leaves and grass, had been heavy to drag over the many long leagues, and his clothes were chafed into holes as he himself was chafed into sores. Stooping down beside him, the road mender tried to get a peep at secret weapons at his breast, or where not, but in vain, for he slept with his arms crossed upon him, and they were set as resolutely as his lips. Fortified towns, with their stockades, guardhouses, gates, trenches, and drawbridge, seemed to the mender of roads to be so much air as against this figure. And when he lifted his eyes from it to the horizon and looked around, he saw in his small fancy similar figures, stopped by no obstacle, that were tending the centers all through France. The man slept on, indifferent to showers of hail and intervals of brightness, indifferent to sunshine on his face and shadow, to the pattering lumps of dull ice on his body, and the diamonds into which the sun turned them, until the sun was low in the west and the sky was aglow. Then, the mender of roads, having got his tools together and all things ready to go into the village, roused him. "Good," said the sleeper. 2 leagues beyond the summit of the hill?" "Just about." "About? Good." The mender of roads went home, with the dust going on before him according to the set of the wind, and was soon at the fountain, squeezing himself in among the lean kine brought there to drink, and appearing even to whisper to them, in his whispering to all of the village. When the village had taken its poor supper, it did not creep to bed as it usually did, but came out of doors again and remained there. A curious contagion of whispering was upon it, and also, when it gathered together at the fountain in the dark, another curious contagion of looking expectantly at the sky in one direction only. Monsieur Gabelle, chief functionary of the place, became uneasy, and went out on his housetop alone, and looked in that direction as well, glanced down from behind his chimneys at the darkening faces by the fountain, and sent word to the scarcitan who kept the keys of the church that there might be need to ring the tocsin by and by. The night deepened. The trees around the old chateau, keeping its solitary state apart, moved in a rising wind, as though they threatened to pile upon the building that was massive and dark in the gloom. Up the 2 terraced flights of steps, the rain ran wildly and beat at the great door, like a swift messenger rousing those within. Uneasy rushes of wind went through the hall, among the old spears and knives, and passed lamenting up the stairs, and shook the curtain of the bed where the last Marquis had slept. East, west, north, and south, through the woods, 4 heavy-treading, unkempt figures crushed the high grass, and crackled the branches, striding cautiously to come together in the courtyard. 4 lights broke out there, and moved away in different directions, and then all was black again. But not for long. Presently the chateau began to make itself strangely visible by some light of its own, as though it were growing luminous. Then a flickering streak played behind the architecture of the front, picking out the transparent places and showing where balustrades, arches, and windows were. Then it soared higher, and it grew broader and brighter. Soon from a score of the great windows flame burst forth, and the stone faces awakened, staring out of the fire. A faint murmur arose about the house from the few people who were left there, and there was a saddling of a horse and riding away. There was a spurring and a splashing through the darkness, and bridle was drawn in the space by the village fountain, and the horse, in foam, stood at Monsieur Gabelle's door. "Help, Gabelle! Help, everyone!" The tocsin rang impatiently, but other help, if there was any, there was none. The mender of roads and 250 friends stood with folded arms at the fountain, looking at the pillar of fire in the sky. "Must be 40 feet high," they said, and none moved. The rider from the chateau and the horse in foam clattered away through the village and galloped up the stony steep to the prison on the crag. At the gate, a group of officers were looking at the fire. Removed from them was a group of soldiers. "Help, gentlemen officers! The chateau is on fire! Valuable objects may be saved from the flames by your aid! Help! Help!" The officers looked towards the soldiers, who looked at the fire, gave no orders, and answered with a shrug and a biting of the lip, "It must burn." As the rider rattled down the hill again and through the street, the village was illuminating. The mender of roads and the 250 friends, inspired as one man and woman by the idea of lighting up, had darted into their houses and were putting candles in every pane of glass. The general scarcity of everything occasioned candles to be borrowed in a rather peremptory manner from Monsieur Gabriel, and in a moment of reluctance and hesitation on his part, the mender of roads, once so submissive to authority, had remarked that carriages were good to make bonfires with, and that the horses were roastable. The chateau was left to itself to flame and burn. In the roaring and raging of the fire, a red-hot wind, driving straight from the infernal regions, seemed to be blowing the building away. With the rising and falling of the blaze, the stone faces showed as if they were in torment. When great masses of stone and timber fell, the face with the 2 dints in the nose became obscured. Anon struggled out of the smoke again, as if it were the face of the cruel marquis burning at the stake and contending with the fire. The chateau burned. The nearest trees laid hold of by the fire scorched and shriveled. Trees at a distance, fired by the four fierce figures, began going around the blazing edifice with a new forest of smoke. Molten lead and iron boiled in the marble basin of the fountain. The water ran dry, the extinguisher tops of the towers vanished like ice before the heat, and trickled down into the 4 rugged wells of flame. Great rents and splits branched out in the solid walls like crystallization. Stupefied birds wheeled about and dropped into the furnace. And the 4 fierce figures trudged away, east, west, north, and south, along the night-enshrouded roads, guided by the beacon they had lighted, towards their next destination. the illuminated village, had seized hold of the Toscan, and abolishing the lawful ringer, it now rang for joy. Not only that, but the village, light-headed with famine, fire, and bell-ringing, and bethinking itself that Monsieur Gabelle had to do with the collection of their rent and taxes, though it was but a small installment of taxes and no rent at all, thinking that Gabelle had got in those latter days, became impatient for an interview with him, and surrounding his house, summoned him to come forth for a conference. Whereupon Monsieur Gabelle did heavily bar his door and retire to hold counsel with himself. The rest of that conference was that Gabelle again withdrew himself to his housetop beyond his stack of chimneys, this time resolving that if his door was broken in, he was a small southern man of relative temperament, he would pitch himself head first over the parapet and hopefully crush a man or two down below. Probably Monsieur Gabelle passed a long night up there, with the distant chateau for fire and candle, and the beating at his door combined with the joy ringing for music, not to mention his having an ill-omened lamp slung across the road in front of his posting-house gate, which the village showed a lively inclination to displace in his favor. A trying suspense, to be passing a whole summer night on the brink of that black ocean, ready to take the plunge into it, upon which Monsieur Gabelle was truly resolved. But the friendly dawn appearing at last, and the rush candles of the village guttering out, the people thankfully dispersed, and Monsieur Gabelle came down, bringing his life with him for that little while. Within 100 miles, and in the light of other fires, there were other functionaries less fortunate that night and other nights, whom the rising sun had found hanging across once peaceful streets where they had been born and bred. Also, there were other villagers and townspeople less fortunate than the mender of roads and his fellows, upon whom the functionaries and soldiery turned with success, and who they strung up in their turn. But the fierce figures were steadily wending east, west, north, and south, be that as it was, and whosoever hung, fire burned. The altitude of the gallows that would turn to water and quench it, no functionary by any stretch of mathematics would ever be able to calculate successfully. And that is the end of chapter 23, which again, it's a very action-packed sequence, but it's so metaphor-heavy. Maybe that's what my thing against Dickens is. Maybe I just don't like metaphors, or at least not metaphors in every sentence. And I feel like I'm complaining about this book a lot, so I do apologize for that. I'm enjoying it and also not, if that makes sense. But darn it, we're gonna finish it. Somehow. Come heck or high water, I'm finishing this book. So I guess with all of that, I am going to let you guys go for tonight, and I will see you tomorrow for another chapter. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out, and I will see you tomorrow.